Nicholas Harrison was a model of success. He ran a large investment firm that generated millions of dollars in revenue and was considered one of the most powerful people in the financial world. His days were scheduled to the minute, starting with a morning jog at his estate in the hills of San Francisco and ending with meetings with business partners in exclusive restaurants. However, behind this facade of a brilliant life was a deep sense of emptiness. At 48 years old, Nicholas was divorced, with no children and no friends to confide in. His only close relative, his younger brother Conrad, was the opposite of Nicholas. Conrad lived life to the fullest, often getting into scandals and spending money on entertainment. The brothers rarely saw each other, and their meetings usually ended in arguments. Therefore, Conrad's appearance on Nicholas's birthday came as a complete surprise. Conrad showed up at his office with a big smile and a box wrapped in luxurious paper. "Happy birthday, brother," he exclaimed, placing the box on his desk. "I know you don't like holidays, but this is a gift you won't be able to refuse." Nicholas looked at his brother with suspicion and opened the box. Inside was a certificate for participation in a game from a mysterious company called CRS, Consumer Recreation Services. "What is this? Is this a joke?" Nicholas asked, frowning. "No, it's not a joke," Conrad replied, smiling. "It's something that will change your life. I went through it myself. And now it's your turn." Conrad began to explain that CRS organizes unique personalized games that aim to change the way people perceive life. He told how the game helped him to cope with his inner fears and find a new meaning in life. Nicholas listened with disbelief, but his eyes flashed with curiosity. "Just try it, Nick," Conrad insisted. "You have nothing to lose. Although, if you don't dare, I understand. It's not for everyone." Nicholas didn't like challenges that questioned his control over the situation. He decided to accept the offer, although he remained skeptical. The next day, he went to the CRS office, located in a skyscraper in the city center. At the reception desk, he was greeted by a friendly woman who asked him to fill out a questionnaire and take a few tests. "This is part of the standard procedure," she explained. "We need to understand your strengths and weaknesses so we can tailor the game specifically for you." The tests lasted several hours. They included psychological questions, physical tests, and even a hypnotherapy session. Nicholas felt uncomfortable but kept his cool. In the end, he was told that his application was accepted, but was not given any details about when and how the game would start. A few days later, Nicholas returned to his normal life. The game seemed like a whim of Conrad's that he could ignore. But in the evening, when he returned home, his key did not fit the door. Puzzled, he tried to call security, but the connection was cut off. At that moment, Nicholas realized that the game was up. The CRS office, located in the heart of the business district, looked both modern and mysterious. The glass facade of the building sparkled in the sunlight, and the company logo was so unobtrusive that it was easy to miss. Inside, there was an atmosphere of restraint, soft lighting, impeccably decorated interior, and a pleasant smell of coffee. Every detail seemed to have been thought out to create a sense of trust and professionalism. Nicholas was greeted by the manager with his usual friendly smile. He introduced himself as Jonathan Fields and, shaking hands with Nicholas, said, "It's a pleasure to welcome you to CRS, Mr. Harrison. We have everything ready to create a unique experience for you." He led Nicholas to a spacious office with a large screen on the wall and invited him to sit down. "A game is more than just entertainment," Jonathan began. "It's an experience that allows you to look at your life from a different perspective. We create scenarios tailored to your individual needs, fears, and desires. All you have to do is trust the process." These words aroused a mixture of interest and skepticism in Nicholas. He was used to being in control of every aspect of his life, and the idea of giving up control to someone else seemed illogical to him. "When does it start?" he asked, trying to keep his tone calm. "The game will begin when you least expect it," Jonathan replied with a hint of mystery. "We won't give you any instructions or timetables. Just live your life and the game will find you." After a short briefing, Nicholas was asked to take a series of tests. These were not only standard psychological surveys, but also tests of reaction, flexibility of thinking, and even stress tolerance. He was asked to solve complex puzzles, describe his greatest fears, and even recall the happiest moments of his childhood. During the test, Nicholas felt a little irritated. He didn't like his personal space to be invaded, And here, it seemed, they were trying to penetrate to the very depths of his mind. But his curiosity won out, and he completed all the tasks. When the process was over, Jonathan shook his hand and said, "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Harrison. Everything is ready now. We will contact you when the time comes." For the next few days, Nicholas lived in a normal rhythm. He dealt with work issues, met with partners, and even forgot about CRS. But one evening, on his way home, he felt something strange. His key no longer fit the door. He tried to call security through the intercom, but the connection was cut off. Then his phone started receiving strange messages. "The game has begun. The next steps are a test of your trust. Follow the instructions." Nicholas looked at the phone screen, trying to understand what was happening. His life, which had always been under control, had suddenly turned into chaos. He tried to call his office, but the line was busy. His bank card didn't work, and everyone around him seemed to stare at him a little longer than usual. That evening, Nicholas realized that his normal life was over. The game had begun, and now he was a part of it, whether he wanted to be or not. As the game began, Nicholas's life began to fall apart at an incredible rate. What seemed strange at first quickly turned into a nightmare. His bank card stopped working, his accounts were blocked, and his access to the company's corporate resources was denied. His secretary informed him that his personal account had been sealed due to an investigation into financial fraud. On the streets of the city, where he used to be greeted by his friends, everyone now avoided his gaze. The car parked outside his office suddenly disappeared. Nicholas tried to call a taxi, but every car that pulled up immediately drove away as soon as the driver made eye contact with him. One evening, when he went to a restaurant to have dinner, the manager came up to him and asked him to leave, explaining that his presence was making the customers uncomfortable. Nicholas stared at him, unable to believe how quickly his world had become alien. These events forced him to go to the police. But even there, things didn't go according to plan. At the police station, he was told that a case had been opened against him and asked to wait for a detective. When he finally showed up, Nicholas was unexpectedly accused of forgery. He was arrested but released a few hours later without explanation. On the way out of the police station, he found a note. "This is part of the game. Don't give up." The next day, Nicholas met a woman named Claire. She was a waitress in a small cafe where he stopped for coffee. Her behavior was strange. She seemed to know more about his situation than he did. She suddenly leaned over and whispered, "They are watching. Don't trust anyone." Her words gave him mixed feelings. Was she an ally or part of the game? However, Claire soon confirmed her intentions when she saved him from a group of pursuers. Their escape was the beginning of a long and dangerous partnership. They hid in empty houses, ran through dark streets, avoiding cameras and suspicious people. But even then, Nicholas couldn't be sure if it wasn't another CRS trap. Every time he thought he had found a safe place or an ally, the situation changed. One of his friends, Jim, offered to help, but in the end he turned out to be a fake CRS agent. Nicholas had to flee when Jim tried to turn him in to a group of armed men. He began to doubt everyone. Gradually, chaos engulfed his entire life. Unidentified calls came in the middle of the night, unsigned letters were left under hotel room doors, and messages on his phone contained only cryptic instructions. Each new action was a test of his psyche. One day he opened the door of his temporary home and saw a huge phrase written in red paint, "The end is near." Nicholas could no longer distinguish reality from the game. His paranoia grew and his confidence melted away. He was on the verge of a complete breakdown when Claire told him, "They want to break you. The whole game is built on making you lose control. But you have to hold on. That's the only way to win." Her words gave him hope, however fragile. Nicholas realized that the chaos he had been plunged into was intentional, part of a larger plan devised by CRS. Now he had to focus on finding a way out of this trap and regaining control of his life. Nicholas's life had finally lost all signs of normalcy. He was a man who was always in control, but now he was in chaos. His identity and reality, which had once seemed unshakable, fell apart like a house of cards. He spent his nights on the streets, hiding in dark alleys and abandoned buildings. He didn't trust anyone anymore, not even Claire, who was by his side. Sometimes he doubted whether she was really an ally or just another piece of the big game. Her reassuring words sounded less and less convincing as each new attempt to escape ended in failure. One night, they found themselves in an old warehouse, trying to find shelter. Nicholas saw a broken phone left there and decided to check if it was working. Dialing the number that used to belong to his office, he heard a recorded female voice. "You make decisions, but they don't matter. All of this is just part of your journey." His hands shook and the phone fell to the concrete floor. Nicholas realized that he was trapped in a situation he couldn't break. His own mind had become his enemy. In every shadow he saw pursuers, every sound seemed threatening. Claire observed his condition and tried to support him. She told him that what he was seeing was just a test, and that he had to trust himself. "They want you to give up," she kept saying. "It's a game, Nicholas. But the game doesn't last forever." But Claire's words could not stop the internal disintegration. Nicholas began to lose his sense of reality. One day, when they found temporary shelter in an abandoned apartment, he saw his reflection in the mirror. It looked exhausted, with a drained face and shadows under his eyes. He barely recognized himself. On the table, he saw a notebook with cryptic inscriptions. Among the chaotic notes and drawings, one phrase stood out: "All this is your decision." These words left him with a feeling of emptiness in his soul. Was he really in control of his fate, or was his every move predicted? The culmination of despair came when they got to the old theater, where there seemed to be no one. But when Nicholas opened the stage door, dozens of spotlights were directed at him. Voices came from everywhere, voices that seemed familiar and alien at the same time. "We warned you, Nicholas. You cannot win." He was filled with fear mixed with rage. Nicholas rushed forward, but fell into an open hatch leading to the basement. In the darkness, he heard footsteps, but he couldn't tell if it was Claire or someone else. His fall stopped when he found himself in a room with high ceilings. On the walls hung monitors showing him, at different moments in the game, on the streets, in cafes, in warehouses. He saw himself from the outside, and it was unbearable. At that moment, Nicholas realized that he was no longer in control of anything. His life had turned into a downward spiral. He sat in the middle of this room, realizing that despair had completely consumed him. After a sleepless night in the room with the monitors, Nicholas felt like his mind was on the edge. His body was exhausted, but his thoughts kept going. Each monitor was playing fragments of the game, like a puzzle he was trying to put together. He noticed that all the events were not random, they formed a certain scenario. In one of the scenes, he saw Claire. She was talking to a man whom Nicholas did not recognize. The video was without sound, but their gestures betrayed tension. The man handed her an envelope, and she shook her head and took it. This scene made Nicholas angry. Could Claire be part of the game? He tried to open the doors from the room, but they were all locked. Finally, one of them gave way, and Nicholas found himself in a long corridor illuminated by a weak neon light. On its walls hung photographs of moments in his life: childhood, youth, business meetings. Each photo had a caption: "Decisions have consequences." The corridor led him to a huge hall. In the center was a round table with people in suits. Their faces were hidden by masks. One of them stood up and gestured for Nicholas to sit down. "Congratulations, Mr. Harrison," the masked stranger said. "You've almost finished the game." Nicholas sat down, swallowing nervously. "What does this mean?" "Who are you?" he asked. The masked man nodded, and a video started playing on the big screen hanging on the wall. It showed the moments of the game: how Nicholas tried to escape the chase, how Claire saved him, how he opened the theater door. This time, however, scenes were inserted behind the scenes. The technical staff managed the events, created illusions, and adjusted situations. "The game was planned to the smallest detail," the stranger said. "Everything you experienced was part of our script. But the goal is not to break you. The goal is to show you who you really are." Nicholas felt like he was about to lose his mind. He leaned back in his chair, trying to comprehend what he had heard. This was all. For what? He asked, clenching his fists. "You were playing with my life." "Your life needed to change," the stranger replied. "You were living in an illusion of control, isolated from real emotions and connections. The game was created to break down those walls." Nicholas saw Claire enter the room. She looked guilty, but her eyes radiated determination. "I'm sorry, Nicholas," she said. "I was part of the game, but not because I wanted to betray you. I wanted to help you understand yourself." Her words pierced the armor Nicholas had worn for years. He felt the tension in his body begin to ease. His voice trembled as he asked, "So what now? Is the game over?" The masked stranger nodded. "From now on, everything depends on you. We have only created the conditions. Now you are free to make your own choices." The doors of the hall opened, and Nicholas stepped out onto the roof of the skyscraper. The wind freshened his face. The city lights sparkled below. He stood there, looking at the horizon, realizing that the game had really changed him. He now saw his life from a new perspective, not as a chessboard, but as an endless opportunity. As he left the CRS building, Nicholas felt the fresh air fill his lungs. It was not just relief, but a sense of rebirth. His steps, though slow, were confident, as if he had just found himself anew. The city around him looked familiar, but at the same time completely different. His perception changed. Every detail now seemed important, every sound had meaning. He stood on a street corner where it was always noisy. People were passing by, just as preoccupied with their business as before. But Nicholas no longer felt a part of this bustle. He saw it differently, not as chaos, but as a symphony in which he could find his place. Nicholas' first decision was to find Claire. He didn't know if she was still a part of the game or if her role was over, but he felt he had to thank her. Their last conversation had left him with a feeling of incompleteness. He found her in the small cafe where they had first met. She was sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, as if she were waiting for him. "Nicholas," she said when he sat down next to her. Her voice was calm, but her eyes shone with emotion. "I don't know who you were in this game," he began, looking her straight in the eye, "but you helped me understand myself. And for that I am grateful." Claire smiled and touched his hand. "You were stronger than you thought you were. The game only showed you what you already had inside." After that meeting, Nicholas began to change his life. Returning to his company's office, he gathered his team and announced a new course. No more mindless pursuit of profit. Now he wanted the business to benefit not only shareholders but also society. His employees were surprised at first, but quickly realized that this Nicholas was different from the one they had known before. He also reconnected with his brother Conrad. Their conversation was long and emotional. Conrad admitted that he organized the game because he saw Nicholas losing himself in his work and isolation. "I knew you would hate me for this," Conrad said, "but I couldn't stand to see you turn into a robot anymore." Nicholas was silent for a long time, and then he just hugged his brother. "I may never forget this," he said, "but I realize now that you wanted the best for me." The new Nicholas became closer to people. He started spending more time with his employees, listening to their problems and ideas. He also became involved in charity work, funding programs to help people in difficult circumstances. Every new day was an opportunity for him to change not only himself but also the world around him. Once, while walking along the coast, he stopped to admire the sunset. Previously, he would have just walked by, thinking about his work. But now he stopped to see the beauty of the moment. This was his new beginning, his new life, where every day mattered.